Well, I am. I've been planning tonight for a long time, at least since I got back from Selma this summer. And many of you know I marched with the NAACP's Journey for Justice, and was able to be there on the opening day in Selma, Alabama, and for just a little tad more than 40 days and 40 nights. A group of people marched from Selma all the way to Washington, D.C. More than 200 Reform rabbis marched, one at least every day from the Central Conference of American Rabbis. A Torah scroll from Chicago Sinai, one of the earliest Reform congregations in our movement dating back to the early 1800s. That Torah scroll was carried lovingly by Jews and Gentiles alike, each and every step of the way from Selma to Washington. And we marched for education. We marched for a fair justice system. We marched to restore the Voting Rights Act in our country, to correct the ills and divisions among the racial divides and chasms in our country. And so I had the privilege of meeting an extraordinary person who marched the whole way. And she's been making the rounds of a number of congregations, synagogues, sharing her story. She's a heroine in her own right. Keisha Thomas is a woman who is known for something that happened quite a while ago, actually, in 1996, when she was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She was photographed protecting a man believed to have been a Klan supporter. And the photograph was featured as one of Life's magazine's Picture of the Year. She had gone to a protest rally, and the Klan at a counter protest of the Klan rally. And as things often do in those situations, tempers flared and fists were flying, and soon he was down on the ground. And Keisha had the courage and bravery to protect that man. I'm not going to tell her whole story. I'll let her do the rest of that. But she's been an advocate for justice and equality. She's been an incredibly strong voice for actually translating and helping people understand the deep divisions of hate and racial bias in this country. And she does it with kindness. And I've also invited tonight, and we're going to hear from her in a minute, Minnie Hadley-Hempstead, who is the president of the NAACP Los Angeles chapter. She's a native of my part of the world, Yazoo, Mississippi. And she's been here over 50 years. We're glad to welcome you and Melvin tonight as our guests. And she's a life member of the NAACP, and she has served for many years. She's a former teacher and educator, and she chaired the education committee here for the NAACP, and now she has the honored position as president. And I'm just going to say this before I turn the floor over to them and invite them to both come forward. We're here to have a talk, to learn what we can do, and we're here to begin to think about the ways in which this congregation, our congregation, can become more active in the fight for racial equality and harmony in this country. And our student rabbi, Michael Sheffrin, will be engaging in conversations that we will have here among ourselves about learning and what this will mean for us and what we have to learn, because we have a lot to learn. And so with that, I want to invite my friend Keisha and Minnie Hadley-Hempstead forward. If you'll come up here to the pulpit, we'll hear from both of you and also have some time for some questions and comments. Keisha? Sit down, Minnie, and then we'll...
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
How are we doing this evening? Good. Can you all hear me without the microphone?
Here, Keisha, we're streaming, so
We're screaming. Okay.
we're streaming. We're screaming and streaming, so use that.
Okay, can you hear me better? Perfect. Thank you once again for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. My name is Keisha Thomas, and I'm a human rights activist, right? So she told you a little bit about my story back in 1996. So let me explain the story from what happened that day. When I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and how many of you have heard of Ann Arbor, Michigan before? All right, go blue. Okay, great. So Ann Arbor is a lot like Berkeley, California. It's a very liberal place, a very forward-thinking place, right? So if you want to have chaos, right, and the Klan to get attention, you go to places like Berkeley. You go to places like Ann Arbor, right? So when I heard that the Klan was coming to town, I decided I have to be there too. And when I go there, I am going to go and I'm going to express to the Klan that you have no right here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Your views are not welcome. So how many of you have ever been to a protest before? I am among my people. I love it. So as you know, when you go to a protest, there's always someone on a bullhorn, right? So there's a woman on the bullhorn, and she's got the crowd engaged, and she's yelling, and she's charged up, and she says, they're not welcome here. We're like, no, they're not. She's like, this is an injustice. I'm like, yes, it is. And all of a sudden, she says, there's a Klansman in the crowd. Get him. The whole crowd turned, and I turned too. And I ran after this man. And I'm yelling at this man. I'm saying, you are not welcome here. How do you not like me? You don't even know me and the color of my crack. Someone hit him over the head with a protest sign and knocked him to the ground. Once he was on the ground, they started to stomp on his head. It felt like two angels had lifted my body up and laid me down on this man. I have never felt more sure of what I was going to do in that moment than right then. I laid my body on him so that he wouldn't get killed. How many of you have smartphones out there? Okay. I want you to whip out your smartphones, and I want you to go to your Google. Now, while you're going to your Google, we're going to talk about the First Amendment right, Constitution, which is freedom of speech. We all have the right to say whatever we want to say. The difference is we do not have the right to put our hands on anyone just because they don't agree with what we have to say. Fair enough? Now, when you go to Google, type in KESHIA space Thomas, THOMAS. Now, Wikipedia is going to come up, but if you scroll down just a touch, you'll see the BBC article. And on that BBC article, you're going to see a series of photographs. Now, you see the man running, you see me in the crowd, you see them hitting him, you see me on top of him. I'm going to tell you a story that's not in the BBC articles, and it's not in Wikipedia. But first, I've got to ask you all a couple questions. Can anyone here tell me what mercy is? Compassion. Right. I like that. I describe mercy as withholding something, particularly a punishment that someone deserves. Right? Does anybody have any idea what grace is? Say that again? Alignment with God. Okay. All right. I like to describe grace as giving you something that you don't deserve. Right? So if mercy is withholding a punishment that you do, and grace is giving you something that you don't deserve, let me tell you how I got mercy and I got grace. because I take it as my personal responsibility to go to places like Baltimore during the riots, in the streets, talking to the young people as they're tearing up stuff and being violent. And I talk to them, I say, you know what? When these cameras leave and they go on to a new story, you will just be a black person with a record. Nobody will care. They won't think that you did this in the name of injustice. You'll just be a violent person. Now let me tell you the story that's not in Wikipedia. Now I've told this story on Oprah, but I'll never tell it in print, and I'll tell you why. After I got up from saving this Klansman, someone said, hey kid, what's your name? I said, Keisha Thomas. Not thinking about it. They said, how do you spell it? K-E-S-H-I-A, Thomas. I got stuff to do. So I go back to protesting. And because of being in the middle of a protest and chaos and whatnot, time is irrelevant. So I don't know exactly how much time passed by from me saving the Klansman to the next action. But I look up and I see 2 police officers giving the black kid the business. You all understand what I mean by giving him the business. All you got to do is turn on your TV. You see it happen every day. I went up, and as this police officer is roughhousing this kid like nobody's business, I push a police officer. Remember what I just told you about mercy and grace? Right? If I was convicted of a felony, I would have just been another black woman with a record. But because of the events of that day and the way that things fell, me saving Klansmen, and also having a community in Ann Arbor that knew me, right? I was never charged with a felony. So that's why I take it upon myself to go talk to kids, because the dice is not always going to roll in your favor like this. There's other ways in which we can get justice, right? Right. So, my first round of questions. Who has a question for me? Don't make me call on you. Yes, there we go. Hold on, let me bring the mic down for you. What's your name, love?
I'm Lisa Freed. If coincidentally enough, it's not really a question, it's more but a comment. Do you know the story of Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis in Durham, North Carolina, in 1973?
No, but you're going to tell us.
You know I am. It was actually, Durham, as I didn't know, was still segregated. Department of Education brings in a gentleman, and Bill Riddick, to put together a charrette. What's a charrette? A charrette is the bringing together of different sides. C.P. Ellis, head local guy of the KKK. Ann Atwater, lady African-American activist in the time. Yeah, both of them brought together as the co-chairs. And I just recently worked on a play. It's also based on a book called The Best of Enemies. And we learned these 2 people who started out completely hating each other. Completely the language in the play, the language that came from that era against each other, how they evolved into such good friends. And so when the rabbi told your story on Yom Kippur, and I just was so proud to know another story of people who give to somebody who we truly do dislike, and that we can do it in a less than violent way. That and we go back to Martin Luther King. I'm sorry, peace. It is, and so meeting you, I'm extremely honored. But that was it. I can keep going. So, and everybody in the room.
Well, thank you. It was my honor and my pleasure. I got you next, and I've got you right here. Okay. What's your name, my dear?
Barry. So what happened with the Klansman on the ground? Did he eventually get back in touch with you? And was he...
That's one of my popular questions, right? Whatever happened to the mystery Klansman? All right, I'm going to tell you the story. I never heard from him again. But I was at a coffee house back in the 90s. And let me tell you, love, coffee houses back in the 90s, before Starbucks, were something. So I'm at this coffee house, and this kid comes up to me. You know what he says? He says, I want to say thank you. And I said, thanks for what? He said, that was my dad. You never know how we're connected, right? Never know. Now, let me fast forward the story a couple years. I'm not going to tell you how long because I'll be telling you my age. But I'm on Facebook, and I get a message. Well, people friend me all the time, and I always accept them until they put up like naked photos. And then I'm like, I got to disconnect you. So I accepted this person as a friend, and then I get an instant message. And the instant message says, I've been reading a lot of stories about you and my dad lately, and it's been making me tear up. I hadn't heard from this guy in years. And then you start to think that it was an illusion that he came up and said thank you. And so he gives me his number, and I call him up, and we're chatting. I never told the reporter what his name was. So I asked him, hey, what they used to call you back in the day? He said, you know what he said? They used to call me Mad Dog. Now they just call me Dog. I knew it was him. So, you never know. And when I talk to kids at schools and I say to the kids, you all have mommies and daddies, right? How would you feel if somebody hurt your mom and dad? Right? So it takes it to a whole different level. It's one thing to be the Klansman over there, but it's another thing to be the father. So I found out that he still lives in Michigan. He has a 12-year-old daughter. Yeah. All right. You had a question for me, my dear? What's your name?
My name is Robert. Hi. You've had a lot of experience speaking to Reformed congregations.
Okay, so this is what happened. I am not a member of the NAACP. I'm not part of the NAACP, but I'm a human rights activist. I've been going to Baltimore now. Reverend Cornell Brooks is on top of me. He's the president of the whole NAACP. But I was going to a friend's house to do some work. And like I said, I'm an activist. So I've been active with Sandra Bland. Do you all know who she is? Make sure we say her name, right? Sandra Bland. I've been active. Have you heard of a pool party incident where a little girl was, yes, very active, going to those places. Baltimore. Familiar with Baltimore? So there comes a point where you're going to all these places and you are going to all these different things, but something about a unified stand, right? I was going to a friend's house to do some work. I needed to update my website or do something that I was just like, I'll pay you in drinks to do this. And his roommate worked for the NAACP. His name was Quincy Bates. And Quincy says, the NAACP is going on a march next week from Selma, Alabama to Washington, D.C. I said, good luck with that. That's a long walk. But sometimes in here, in your spirit, you know you have to move and walk on faith. I found out a week before it happened, and I said, I have to go. I don't know what's going to happen. All I know is we're walking from Selma to Washington. I don't know. I looked at the list of stuff to grab, packed my bag. I had the biggest bag, though. I'm on the road for 46 days, and I decided to go. And all of a sudden, on the very first day, I'm taking pictures. I'm, snapping stuff and whatnot. And there's guy, and they have a rally, right, in Selma. And I'm always walking around talking to people. And I couldn't believe I have this video, but there's this guy, and he's holding this thing that I've never seen before, right? I'm like, and he's talking. I'm like, oh, he's just another talker. Just another, guy on the bullhorn. But then all of a sudden we start marching over a bridge, and then there's this one woman, and she's carrying that thing. Okay. Next thing you know, I had no idea that there would be rabbis and Jewish people that would be on this march. It was like a different one every single day. So what happened was, and I'm this kind of person. Any of you ever been the new kid at school? How uncomfortable is that? I don't care if you're 5 to 5,000. If you knew you were going to the NAACP, you're sleeping on a cot, you don't know anybody. So every day I made sure I would say hello to every new person that came in there. That's how I got the reputation through the Jewish community. They would see me on Facebook. Keisha's collected another rabbi, right? In a good way, of course. But next thing you know, I have become friends and they knew my story. But let me tell you it's something a little bit deeper. That's what I tell the young people, a little bit deeper. Now, yes, you can say Keisha Thomas has this great, amazing story, right? But if I didn't get up every day and work every day and was diligent every day about that cause, about that march with the best attitude, the biggest smile, they could have cared less. Your attitude shapes your future. Your attitude, your smile on your face draws people in, right? So sometimes we got to remember about the smiles. If I smile at you long enough, will you let me drive that car? You have a question, my dear. Yes.
My name is Michael. So you won't like this question.
No, I love all questions.
So in the late 50s, my father was on an airplane and sat next to Ralph Bunche, famous black, okay. And he said, "Mr. Bunche, what are you waiting for?" And Mr. Bunche said, "Mr. Becker, these things take time." And my father said, again, "What are you waiting for?" And I think your definition of mercy and grace is consistent with Ralph Bunche's philosophy. But I have a different one. I think it's not the earth that the meek inherit, it's only the dirt. Thank you.
Well, let me try to dissect what you said. So basically you're saying that the ones that rattle the most are the ones that things change?
Not too much, though. Not as much as not in Yahoo, but yes.
Right. The ones that rattle. Okay. So the problem with rattling, and let's talk about rattling in the violent way, right? I know I got to wrap it up. I got to give it
No,
up.
I want Minnie to be able to start, and then we'll have more time for a question.
Okay. So this, I will partially close in this. War and violence are like a tug of war, right? On a rope. You hit me, I got to hit you back. You hit me back, you blow up my house. I blow up your house, I blow up your country. What if we just dropped them and came to the table? Because violence only perpetuates more violence. When I'm shifted from my soul and not in a good way, my whole aura is off. I'm not in a good place. Therefore, I'm going to retaliate in a bad place. It's not going to lead to anything good. But it's been my experience. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with defending yourself. And I hate to say it. You have the right to be here. Everybody has the right to be here. If someone were to come in here and try to take us all out, I'm going to take them out before they take us out. That's my God-given right. But that doesn't mean that I walk around taking other people out first. All right? So that's my brief time. I will be back up to answer more questions.
We'll have more time, Keisha. And so I really want to bring up Minnie Hadley-Hempstead, who is the local LA chapter, which is a big chapter, president of NAACP, because I believe that COLA-ME and the NAACP could become powerful partners in transformation of our city and lay the groundwork for the transformation, the continued transformation of our country. So, Minnie, we are so proud to have you here tonight. You want this or you want to stand there? You want to stand there? Okay.
Good evening. It is my pleasure to be here. I am an admirer of the Jewish spirit. I'm from, my most important story is I'm from Yazoo City, Mississippi. And most of you who live in America have heard of Mississippi. Emmett Till, Medgar Evers, and all the horrors that have come out of that state. And Mississippi has now incorporated the Confederate flag into the state flag. As a matter of fact, I was looking at the game Mississippi was playing in, and that university removed the state flag in Mississippi. And the Confederate flag, I don't know if you know what the Confederate flag is. It's almost a symbol of the Ku Klux Klans. And the states who had adopted that flag were committing treason. They were separating from our country, and that's a crime. But yet, we have lived with that all of these years until this day in Mississippi. And I've been in California now for next year, be 60 years. I left because I wanted a better life for my children. I want my children to be have pride and dignity about themselves. And in Mississippi, that was not possible. Though I don't know what happened, I left there with pride and dignity. I have two daughters. One of my daughters is a division manager for the county of Los Angeles. And she is called a chief. And my youngest daughter, who has 5 children, 5 C-sections from Cedars, has, and 4 have finished college, and the last one is 14, the only son, and she has just gotten her doctorate. So I'm having fun calling her Dr. Mom. So sometimes in life, when it's not perfect, it's helpful because I learned how to be determined, strong, with a desire to make my world a better place, not just for me and my children, for others, because we got it with them. In Mississippi, one day a gentleman came to town. Well, he lived in town, but he became an organizer for the NAACP. He registered a lot of the middle-class African American. They purchased a membership in the NAACP. And the lady next door to us worked in the white people houses, so she would bring home the newspaper and comic books. That's how I learned and got interested in reading. But that day when she brought it home, on the front page of the paper in Yazoo City, Mississippi, were the names and addresses of all the prominent blacks. They had become members of the NAACP. They had to leave town. Many were beaten. Their mortgages on their homes were called, and many of them were fired. That was my first introduction to the NAACP. And when I left Mississippi and I came to Los Angeles, Mark brought me with my things in a little brown paper bag. We had nothing. My grandfather, mother was a slave, and he lived to be 90 plus years old, and he never acquired anything. Because after slavery, they came up with a plan called, what was it called? Sharecropping. And sharecropping is not slavery. It's next to slavery. When you do not read and write, they would give you an allowance for your clothing and your food and your seeds for your cotton and what have you. But at the end of the year, they kept the books. So at the end of the year, you never earned anything. You always came out owing more. In the first 10 years of my life, we lived on the white man's property, and my father was a sharecropper. And in the dead of night, my aunt came and moved us to the city, and the city was Yazoo City, Mississippi. So that's where I stayed until I finished high school, and I left Mississippi at age 17. So when I came here, we could not find work. And you know, our education was not quality education because our teachers could start teaching once they completed the 8th grade. And when I came here, I was afraid to even attempt to go to college because I knew I had an inferior education. But many years later, I sent my husband over to the community college. And he did quite well. In fact, I think he got all A's that semester. So the next semester, I had gotten my courage up. And I thought, I'm going to go over there. So I went over there and I did fine. And after a while, I had my AA degree. So I went over to the university. And I remember I'd never gone to school with anyone other than black people because they didn't allow us to access anything other than the things they had designated for us. So when I went over to the university and I was working 40 hours in a supermarket as a grocery checker because I was supporting my family. And they told me, well, you can only take one class if you're working 40 hours. And I was saying, but if I took one class, I'm never going to get my degree. So I thought, well, I'll just take 3. So I took 3 classes, and the one professor gave me a C, and I was just devastated. I came home, I said, well, I'm not college material because I got a C. But then I thought, well, I'll just give it another chance. So I kept going, and finally I got my bachelor's degree in public administration. And I did not take off a semester, I continued. I went right back for the next semester, and I continued until I got my master's degree in public administration. And the day when I had my gown on and I was going to march, I met that professor on campus who gave me that C.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, you're getting your degree. And I won't call his name, but I turned around so he could see my little hood, and I said, oh, no, Professor, I'm getting my master's degree. And then I thought maybe I'll be an elementary teacher. So I went to another university for 2 more years. And I earned a community college teaching credential and an elementary teaching credential. So that was a kind of like, I need to tell you a little bit about me so you know who I really am. And going back to when I first came to California, we could not find work. So I got a chance to work in a Jewish family's home, babysitting their children. And that's when I learned about the Jew. And that's why I'm here now. It's because what I learned in that home has helped me throughout my life. I learned what kind of people you were, how you thought. The grandmother came, she told me, she says, don't date those little guys. You go over there to UCLA and date those guys, you know? And I watched them, the time they put in with their children, how you always wanted to make sure that we knew your history, you see? And since then, I've traveled all over the world. I've been on every continent except Antarctica. I've been in every state in the United States except Maine and Alaska. So I have gone to just look at my world to see what it's like and how it functions. And I still remember the Jew. When I was in college, and when I was an undergraduate, I met one Jewish girl. And when I was a graduate student, I met another one. and I used to watch them. And they worked diligently. They had goals and timetables. And I remember the one girl, we were grading, they were grading on a curve. This was years ago, so I might not have it exactly straight. But they used to grade on the curve, if you know what that means. In other words, the highest grade was a A. And it doesn't matter if you didn't get 100. If you got 89, you still got an A. And this particular girl had the highest score in the whole classroom. And one old lady was struggling. They were majoring in psychology. I wasn't, but I told the professor, I said, I'm majoring in psychology too. So if in order for you to go to the master's program, you had to have at least a B. But I wasn't in psychology, so I told her. And she was saying, she had an A, I said, and they said, we're going to give extra points. We're going to give extra points if you like. She took the thing and I was like, why are you doing that? You already have an A. And she said, well, I want to do the best I can. And, that's been my theory. I'm going to do the best I can. And when I started working in the NAACP, I'm a life member. My husband's a life member. I was working in the NAACP because if you will notice, in every area that's negative, African Americans are in first place. Largest number of people in prison, broken families, unemployed. We are in first place. And I don't like being in first place in those areas. And I thought I could do something to make my world better for my people. We are unemployed, and then we are blamed for all the ills in society. If it's hard for you to find a decent job and you were hanging out on the street every day, you throw a rock or something. So you too would be in our position. And it is not easy to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do better, especially when you are in a home where people have become disillusioned and you know that the policeman use of force, like the little kid in, Michigan, the policeman drove up within a minute. They just killed that little kid, And someone mentioned Bland, and didn't she have spirit? And she ended up dead. And people look at that, and when you're not doing too well, it stays with you longer. You understand? So our people are suffering from lack of opportunity, and then not knowing what you can do, even if you do not have opportunity, how you can kind of make an opportunity. But when you're doing it, it's one at a time. It's not a group. So for that reason, I guess I could ask you, I was looking up here, and I saw compassion, and I saw justice. And in our country, we're not getting justice, but we ask you for your compassion. I was supposed to talk about the NAACP. The NAACP started in 1909, so our organization's over 100 years old. And I'm the president of the Los Angeles branch, which is the largest branch west of the Mississippi River. And we are over 100 years old. This will be our 102nd year. And the purpose of our organization was to secure the rights for all people. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment give you the right. 13th, end slavery. Equal protection of the law, and there was no such thing for us. And the NAACP started to end lynching. I don't know if you're familiar with lynching. If I were accused of, and I was so shocked because we get a lot of hate mail in our office. And I had someone send me pictures of 3 men hanging and 2 women, and I did not know that women were also being hung. And it took the NAACP 30 years to end lynching. And when the NAACP started, there were, about 7 African Americans, and the other 60 people were white. And they always told me, they said, the NAACP is a black organization that's financed by the Jewish people.
It's true.
Thank you.
It's actually true.
That's true.
It's actually
it is true. And until this day, and we never want to be separated from you, because you are such, I don't know if you know who you really are, stable people, and never give up. So we want you to stick with us and help us, because we need much help. In the areas that we are the weakest is education. See, in America, they did not allow us to attend school. So the language that was spoken in my home with my parent, my mother had a 5th grade education. My father had a 3rd grade education. But the language that was spoken in our home was a language that they made up by listening to other people talk. So you never read the word, or they didn't allow you to go to school. And even here in Los Angeles, I'm a retired teacher. They did not have English books in the classroom. They said, well, you learn the language by listening to it in the home. And that's the problem. You are speaking the language that you hear in the home, but that's not the language of the work world. And we, until this day, have not been able to get them to allow us to access the language programs. If you came here from Germany, I had kids in my class from all nations. They had language classes for them, but they would not allow our children to attend. Okay? And in the schools, we used to have industrial arts classes. My husband took electricity as a high school kid in his home state of Arkansas. And he can put up our fans, change out all our switches. You had a marketable skill when you left high school. They got rid of all those programs. So when our little fellows finish high school, now there is nothing. No jobs. Nothing. You understand? And a lot of people do not know how to, I guess as my mother said, well, baby, you take your lemon and make you some lemonade. And we don't know how to do that, not as a group, but some do better and some do not. Now, one of our, I guess, voting is power. If I can vote, that's a lot of power for me. And now, you know, they have the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. And in one state, until black people could vote, there were no voting rules. You just go and vote. But once we got the right to vote, they put in a lot of rules. They said, well, you have to have a state-issued ID. That sounds good. Let me go and get a state-issued ID. But in order to get that state-issued ID, you have to have a birth certificate. And when I came to California, we didn't have birth certificates. And when we got ready to register or to get a driver's license, we didn't have what we needed. From the South, they didn't give us that. And because my mother worked in the White Lady's Kitchen in Mississippi, she was able to go downtown and get those papers for us. And that's how we were able to get the things that we need. And a lot of places, they closed them down the motor vehicles and put them like 20-something miles away. And if you do not have a car, and most of us don't have any money either, it makes it hard for you to vote. In Texas, they had come up with a law that if you had a gun license, you could use that as ID to register. But if you were a college student, you cannot use that ID. You understand? So, and a lot of people get discouraged And then we have high crime and all the other things. We have programs in this town for our young people. We have youth programs. We have what we call a youth and college division, where we are training those young people to be future leaders. And in my branch, we have a very active youth branch. And we have a women's group. And then we have an AXO group. An AXO group is a academic, cultural, technology, and science competition. And it's a one-year program all year long. And this year, when we went to national, we had 2 winners from my branch. 2 winners in that national competition. So those things are helpful to us. And there are other things that are helpful. But the NAACP is not a black group anymore. It never was, really. It's a group of people working together to make our world better, not just for some people, but for all people. If I were to say to you tonight, can you help us? I would say one way you can help us, because, our history is not in the history books. We built this country off the sweat of our backs. We could not go to school and learn anything. But when slavery ended and near slavery continued for years, and there are still people in this country who are people who look like me who are still living with near slavery. Those are the kind of things that we need your compassion and help with. And another thing is, now it's almost getting to be like a Democrat and Republican thing. If I were a Democrat and you were a Republican, it made no difference. But now we are getting divided. Our country is, and we are the greatest country in the whole world. You go in, I've been in buildings built in the 11th century, but you come to America, it's a different world, And so I would like to keep our country strong, and I'd like for us to elevate so we will have an equal opportunity to be all that we can be. And as I said, thank you for inviting me this evening. I've been it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. God bless. Thank you so much. I'm so proud to have you. I'm so thrilled that Minnie and Keisha could be here with us tonight, because this has got to be the beginning of a conversation. This congregation's been dedicated to all kinds of human rights issues, to gay and lesbian equality, bi and trans equality, but the issues of race cuts across everything in this country. And as I said in my Kol Nidra sermon, this isn't about some people out there. It's about our own congregation and the people who are part of our temple family, our children, and it is our community. And so, as I said, please watch Ikulenu. Our student rabbi is going to be hosting some conversation evenings where we can talk together about our things that we don't know about, our concerns about entering the world of discussions about race and white privilege, and what does that really mean, and what issues within our own congregation and our own city here in Los Angeles and in our state actually drive us to want to change the world. Is it the public education system in our city and in our state? What's happening on our college campuses? Just Carrie's involved with Claremont McKenna. Just this week there was a big problem at Claremont McKenna with people of color and resignations. We see the headlines of what's going on at the University of Missouri. We see the headlines of what's going on in cities across our country with shootings and police issues and policing issues. We're not immune in our world right here. So I'm going to invite you to participate with me, and I'm going to invite you to participate with the NAACP. And Keisha, we're going to keep you around and continue to inspire us and to challenge us to be the best we can be, to be the kindest we can be, but never to lose the light of being an activist to make this world a better place. So thank you both for being here tonight. And